Hola, mi gente. This is Thursday night, Rays Live. How you doing, everybody out there? Well, I think if you're watching me on Facebook, you know who I am. This is Ray Collazo. Hope everybody's doing well. And if you're listening to the podcast, thank you so much for joining Ray's Talk Show. This is your host, Ray Collazo, talking la política. We're going to have a lot on this episode as it relates to the latest political headlines. Trump's carrier deal. How you doing, Leo? My homie Leo Cruz holding it down in D.C. A proud black knight, University of Central Florida, man, my guy, Leo. Hey, Jenny, how you doing, Mama? We're going to talk about this carrier deal, my thoughts on it, the Billionaire Boys Club that Trump's assembling as our nation's potential cabinet, and a little bit about some Latino political updates, which are very interesting. So, and again, if you're watching, hey, Brian, how you doing, buddy? If you're watching you watch me on Facebook Live, greatly appreciate it. I need to go to bed soon, but there was just too much to talk about after, as we all know, we're all venting and we're all looking for therapy here on Facebook. So thought I'd get on here and for people listening to the excerpts of this conversation, which will be on my podcast. Thank you again for Center Race Podcast. For anyone either listening or watching, subscribing to Ray's Podcast would be really helpful if you can write a quick review on iTunes. And if you have an Android device, really it's pick your pleasure. There's SoundCloud, there's Stitcher. We're on iHeartRadio now. We're on Spotify. Tune in. So y'all listen if you got an Android, at least 2 or 3 of those apps are on your phone right now. So, or on your tablet or device. So you can always give Ray's Talk Show a review wherever you can, and again you can always if you have any kind of Apple product, please just give us a review on iTunes. That's super helpful. Then again, you can always email us at podcastrays@gmail.com with your comments or questions. So in this carrier stuff, and I'm curious what our friends watching are thinking about this. So for folks that haven't paid attention, so the HVAC company Carrier had, essentially threatened or announced that there was going to be a few thousand jobs leaving that were no longer going to be at their Indianapolis location. They were going to move down to Mexico. And that call for these kind of jobs to stay in the United States were a big part of now President-elect Trump's platform. And he spoke very much about how, companies would be fined and taxed essentially on the imports that would now be coming into the United States that, for work that, traditionally have been in the USA. And so today he announced that, essentially his vice president-elect Mike Pence, who's still the governor of Indiana, wrote off on a $7 million tax break. Angel, you should be watching your Cowboys. Laura, ¿cómo está? A $7 million tax break to keep some of those jobs, not all, about 800 of the 2,000 in the United States. So again, something that I think is going to be a repeated theme of this presidency is that you're going to see things that are relatively, in a macro sense, small. So 800 jobs, and again, one person's job is not insignificant, but something like 800 jobs being, and we'll talk about the deal in a second. 800 jobs being saved by this incoming president and soon to be president are amplified in a way by his nature of theatrics, which will give his base a very positive sense of what he's doing. So, and I'll talk about my predictions, and I've been predicting this, that for the thank you, Leo. No, not sure if I can repeat that on the air, but thank you, Leo, for your comment. Just teasing. Unlike, so it's something like the bailout of the auto industry, which saved, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of jobs, maybe more, that we had a relatively, it didn't feel as significant as it actually was in a macro sense because the administration and the Democratic Party didn't do a particularly good job of highlighting the success of that legislation and that effort in the beginning of Obama's first term. And so, getting back to the carrier deal, so initially, or throughout his campaign, President-elect Trump's policy recommendation was that any companies like Carrier that would move jobs abroad, the products that those foreign workers or workers abroad would produce that would be then re-imported into the United States would be heavily taxed. Fast forward to today, the announcement was that essentially Carrier would get $7 million tax break to keep some of those jobs in the United States. There was no mention of the fact that the vast majority of these jobs are still going to leave the majority of these jobs are still going to leave the country. Where's the word of the tax? So instead of now companies being taxed, they're being given tax breaks, even though they're still going to be outsourcing a significant amount of these jobs. So you can argue, as Senator Sanders did today in an op-ed, that the guy that's supposedly the great negotiator is looks like a big pushover. Any company essentially could threaten, hypothetically, leaving the United States or sending jobs abroad, and they could go ask for their piece of corporate welfare, and so which happens all the time, particularly in urban America and places like Camden and throughout the country where sports stadiums. I mean, Las Vegas. I think the state of Nevada, frankly, shamefully, even though as a sports fan, I like the idea of the Raiders being in Vegas. But the reality is there's hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to go build a stadium for billionaires that really should be going, particularly to the education system in Las Vegas. And so this is the latest example of corporate welfare being promoted, being spun as a mechanism to create job growth, when it speaks to what appears to be the strategy we're going to revert to from the 80s in the Reagan administration, which was trickle-down economics. So what we're going to see, so the predictions on this end is that we're going to continue to see, under the guise of saving jobs, which again, there's nothing wrong with that, and at times you do have to cut certain deals. It's understandable. But you're going to see a continual trend where the stimulus package isn't going to be about so much block grants to green light certain projects. It's going to be guised in a way of providing pork and tax incentives and tax breaks to companies on the assumption that that will stimulate them to do more, to produce more, and be more active in their business. And that's going to be spun. You're going to see shows, I predict, on the immigration side. One of the things you're going to see is that there's no way that President-elect Trump, even if he's in office 8 years, will deport as many undocumented immigrants as President Obama did. The deporter-in-chief indeed deported over 2 million people. He's not going to deport 2 million people. And so, but what's going to happen, you heard it here first, is that at some point next year, they're going to prepare deporting a few hundred Latino men on that border. They're going to make a big show of lining them up along the border. Trump's going to go down there, and whoever his Homeland Security is, and he's going to say, "Look at this great job we did, law and order, success." Load them up in the vans or however they transport them, and the show, the symbol of them being taken across the border. Again, that 200, 300 people that'll be a part of that spectacle, that disgusting spectacle, will rile up the base and promote this appearance of strength, when the reality is, for various business interests, it's literally impossible for him, and logistically and financially, it's literally impossible for him to deport the amount of people he's talking about. He doesn't even know the numbers. He says, "I'm going to deport all the ones that, all the undocumented people that are criminals." I mean, if there's 11 to 1 million of our people out here that don't have undocumented, how many of them even if you add up all the ones with traffic tickets, it's no more than a couple 100,000. And that's talking about stretching the definition of criminal. So you're going to see these shows. And this is one of the things that I'm very concerned about, is that I'm pretty sure that his base of support is feeling very good about today. Wow, Carrier, save jobs, middle America, the kind of job, we were promised and my grandfather had. And again, I am happy for these people to keep their jobs. And if it's a one-off example, it maybe doesn't. You can argue it's not a bad deal, but the reality is that this is the trend you're going to see. You're going to see big show for relatively small results, and when you start peeling the onion of what's really involved from a policy perspective, it's corporate welfare, tax write-offs, and basically a very bad negotiator. So when he starts taxing these corporations for those imports that Jennifer and our friends that are on the chat are discussing, call me. I'm not holding my breath. And you're listening to Ray Collazo on Ray's Talk Show, talking about the headlines of the week. And for our Facebook Live audience, thank you so much, Jenny, Ace, my cousin Vanessa. Great to see Vanessa on here. My father Ray Collazo, thank you. Evelyn Mantilla, the former state representative in Connecticut. One day that woman needs to run for senator. She's a very sharp woman. Great to see Evelyn contributing. Sonia Troche, girl, doing big thing. Call me, girl. You got a lot going on. Belated happy birthday. A lot of great people watching here on a Thursday night. And I know y'all are heated. That's why we had to, we got to chit chat about it and find more mechanisms so we can have more of you all actively in these conversations. The other thing I wanted to talk about was, kind of where we're at with the cabinet. Is first fear-mongering show against Muslims or Latinos? I think it's easier to do it against Latinos, Leo, because it's obvious. I mean, look, the sad reality is they have the DACA list. That's the thing that keeps me up at night. Those poor young people, we have to support them, and we've let them put themselves on the front line in our movement way too long, and we need to step it up and take center stage on this and support them and protect them. The Muslim piece, that's going to be a little more complicated for him to show. There's no doubt about it. Jennifer Durant says on the chat, the cabinet is the real basket of deplorables. It sounds like a real bad animated movie that'll come out that Kevin Hart will probably do a voiceover on. So for people that have been keeping up, as Jennifer Durant just said eloquently on the chat, we've just had what a who's who, a hodgepodge of cabinet members. So a guy named Nunchkin, who's basically a Goldman Sachs Wall Street guy, a Secretary of Treasury. His apparently his qualifications for this job is that he raised millions of dollars for Donald Trump. Kathy DeVos, one of the leading advocates in the country, a billionaire. I'll get to that, Maison, in a second. Thank you for your question. Kathy DeVos, named Secretary of Education. She's been one of the great advocates for particularly vouchers in education. I'll get to that, and that's going to be very interesting. By the way, a woman associated her family are the Amway empire, and her father, her brother-in-law is black, runs Blackhawk. I mean, you talk about a basket of deplorables there. And Enrique Charon chimes in. Trump supporters unfortunately eating up his current reality show, which was shot today in Indiana. There's no doubt about it. And Wilbur, what is Wilbur's last name? The Commerce Secretary, another billionaire, Wilbur Ross, who looks really out of it. I saw an interview today. So, it's interesting because my father commented in a conversation I had with him this week is that, the billionaires and the proverbial man that typically kind of run these, traditionally, are controlling the marionettes in the background, usually stay in the background. In this administration, they seem to feel so comfortable in the power that they've acquired that they're front and center in this. So it truly is historic in that sense. We usually rarely have billionaires in the cabinet. They control the process oftentimes, but it truly is scary. And, if you just go down the list, the new Health and Human Services or potentially the Health and Human Services nominee, not only are we talking about right-wing conservative ideology, we're talking about ideology that really has very little even acknowledgement, doesn't even pretend that they're really looking out for working people. On the Latino side, I would say, I think we're going to frankly have some very interesting, and some of it I think will be healthy, some very interesting conversations and about this, yeah, and the tragic. That's right, Leo. And Ricketts, the Cubs guy, may be in the mix as well. About the education piece, because the reality is, while many of us, particularly progressives that are that are part of this conversation right now, understand what sort of diverting public education funds to corporate charter school systems, to parochial education systems, which hey, there is that uh, while that we understand the logistical and the policy problems that creates, the reality is your average Latino family, working family in the community, in an inner city or in a badly resourced ex-urban or rural community, if you offer that family a voucher to send their kid to a local Catholic or parochial school, or just provide them what they see as options as it relates to their child's education, that could be an issue that could be used as a quote unquote wedge issue that we have to address, and it's going to be really important that advocates in our community educate folks. We can have disagreements. I mean, look, the reality is we know our faith-based community, the Catholic Church, Christian leadership that have faith-based organizations may already have schools. There's going to be a part of this message from this woman that's going to be attractive to them. So that's going to be a very particular element of it. But look, on the Treasury side, I mean, Wall Street's going to run this. And, it's been very interesting, but not surprising that some of Trump's most ardent supporters that claimed they supported him because he would, quote unquote, drain the swamp, that he wasn't bought or owned by Wall Street or the, quote unquote, political establishment. Where are they now? Where are they now when they're openly being played? Where are they now when, weeks ago after the election, the call was, why don't you people stop complaining, stop whining? The racist talk, demagoguery was just talk. It's not serious. And we proceeded to see hundreds of hate crimes directed at people of color and women in the LGBT community. And the rhetoric has not subsided. And hard right wing, and in the case of Steve Bannon, actual leaders in the acknowledged white supremacist movement are being tapped in some of the most influential positions in this administration. Great to see David Galarza here. You talk about a real leader there, man. He says it like it is, that guy. I'm surprised, David, you're not at Benuelas as we speak. Much respect to our folks in Benuelas. So in terms of the nominations, there's so many battles there. We're going to have to be strategic. I think that the Attorney General nominee, Senator Jeff Sessions, who I spoke about on last week's show, is one that we're going to have to gall in on that fight, particularly since he does have, unlike a Steve Bannon and a few of the other White House nominees, he has to be approved by the Senate, which is going to be an uphill climb. But we're essentially talking about 5 or 6 senators that we're going to need to flip, and we have some thoughts on that from Senator Heller in Nevada and a few others we're going to be targeting. And we're just going to have to be vigilant about holding this administration accountable every step of the way. And as it comes to the cabinet, I don't believe a person of color has been selected for the cabinet. Governor Nikki Haley for the UN position, they can make it a cabinet equivalent position, but that's not technically a cabinet position. Obviously, there's going to be very little diversity as it relates to people of a certain class. I mean, Romney would probably be the poorest guy in the cabinet if he was there. Edison Severino, one of our great labor leaders, has joined us, as well as Cindy Rangel and many others. Thank you for joining me on Raise Live here on a Thursday. And I know y'all I'm just trying to be a vessel so we can spit this out, because there's a lot on our minds. There's a lot on our minds, and rightfully so. We need to continue to have these conversations. But the folks that are going to be controlling domestic policy, the incoming Health and Human Services Director, potentially, Price, Education, DeVos. I mean, these are the people that, oh my God, Lou Barletta could be the Labor Secretary. My God, what a disaster this is. These are the positions that are going to most directly impact our folks day to day. And so we have to be really vigilant on that. And again, you're listening to Raise Live. Appreciate y'all on a Thursday night. Got about a dozen people watching Raise Live. A lot of family and friends really appreciate it. I know you're not watching because of my looks, even though I'm okay. I'm pleasantly surprised at my age that I still have as much black hair as I have here. It looks very black against the white on in the lighting here. So I do appreciate that. But I know y'all are. I'm just a vessel for the frustrations, the questions that many of you have about what we do in the future. And look, the reality is, we got we got to do this. This is our civil rights movement, particularly in the Latino community, and we don't not just have to do it for Latinos. We have to do it for the most vulnerable people in our society, within our community, the immigrant community. A lot of these policies around healthcare reform, around some of these tax policies that are quietly being proposed, the dismantling of Medicare, Medicaid. A lot of them, in particular, are going to impact negatively the most single women. Who's that impacting? Young women, women of color, people that are trying to do the right thing. They're working, they're raising their children, oftentimes with very low support. And instead of trying to figure out how to support them more with with expanded earned income tax credits, which is something we're going to advocate for, with subsidies for daycare, which actually Ivanka spoke about. Haven't heard her speak much lately about it. And other, incentives and opportunities for access to higher education. We're going to sneakily, potentially, with this administration, sneakily, uh, uh, you know, sneakily create policies that are going to undercut those women more and more and more and more, and it's truly disgusting. And we have to be vigilant. Thank you, Prima, for the shout out. And I love doing it. Love the interaction with you guys. Um, one of my cousins, Vanessa Gigliotti, is recounting a hate crime incident she unfortunately was the victim of in Arizona. That's a terrible thing, and it's unfortunately going to continue to happen. I literally get a call from somebody every day in my life at this point, recanting these kind of stories that they heard through a third party, that happened to a neighbor, happened to a friend, maybe happened to them, and it's happening all over the country. And again, you're listening to Ray Collazo on Ray's talk show, whether it's a podcast or the live feed. Thank you again for catching us. And again, we really appreciate the love. You can iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, anywhere you can download a podcast. If you can give us a review, a thumb, a star. It's wow, it happened in New York City of all places. Wow, that's terrible, Vanessa. So sorry to hear that. It helps us gain more exposure to our content. And so, the other things I wanted to quickly discuss on a full podcast episode, I'll be releasing early next week. We had conversations throughout the week with Cuban American leaders and activists around the country about sort of the aftermath of Fidel Castro passing. So I know we've had lots of conversations about the reaction of him passing from the Cuban American community, from the people of Cuba, from non-Cubans of various ideological spectrums. So it's brought up some very interesting conversations entre la familia, and even amongst Cuban Americans, which has been really fascinating. And it's brought up a lot of pain, and it's brought up a lot of old wounds, which I hope ends up being a therapeutic mechanism for the Cuban American community, and provides us an opportunity to kind of have these conversations. There's some real edgy conversations, particularly being presented by people who we have a lot of respect for, like Gustavo Arellano, the Ask Mexican franchise, an excellent journalist and commentator, very provocative content he's been co-signing on as it relates to basically, coming from a more pro-Fidel left Latino orientation, and some of the Twitter battles that have happened between him and Cuban Americans and others has been very interesting. I'll say that on a personal level, I'll have more time on the podcast episode I release. And if my dad's still on, he certainly is responsible for this. But we definitely grew up, having a much different perspective about Fidel, and I'm talking about the '70s, when I was a very small child, than probably most of the Cuban exile community, in terms of looking at it from a pan-Latino kind of person of color perspective around, sure, the man had faults, but, there was, what what was the United States doing for Cuba before that? Sort of fanning the flames of fascism and corruption that was happening on the island, and the symbol. And Fidel's very much a symbol, regardless of where you feel about him. A lot of the emotions and it really comes out of the symbolism of him, whether it was the symbolism that you appreciated about um, the perceived push movement towards more equality for Afro-Cubans and sort of a Pan-African perspective, where there was the him putting a middle finger up to the U.S. imperialism, which it still impacts Latin America and our world. So that again, people take the pieces of his legacy that sort of relate to their story, and so a very complicated legacy. But the bottom line is that, I look at it from a very democratic perspective. At this stage of my life, no one should be the leader of a country 30, 40 years. I don't care if you're Jesucristo, because we're about democracy here, and it's very important that you have those kind of checks and balances, and you don't have power consolidated, even when it leads to things like we just went through here with Donald Trump being elected. Fidel was so great that people made rafts out of cars to escape. That's a very, very good point there, Mazel. Give me a second here. I got to juice myself up here. But I appreciate everyone's commentary here. And again, that's what I have to get to our political bochincha stuff with the Latinos. That's the last thing I wanted to talk about today. Just trying to look through my notes, trying to figure out what I was going to talk about. Okay, and again, really appreciate everyone checking me out here on a Thursday Night Live. And if you're not only subscribing to the podcast, definitely would appreciate a download. And, check out all our content at rayspodcast.com, RAYS podcast.com. Thank you, Jenny. Appreciate you. Thank you for the reminder. It is complex, Cindy. There's no doubt about it. The thing, I have an interview this week that we released with Rachel Matos from the Art Muse, a Columbia grad, and who's the social media director for the We All Grow Latina Network, which I believe Cindy on some level is associated with. And that's a really powerful network that's supporting Latina content creators, primarily bloggers, but content creators throughout the spectrum, the digital space, to support their content, and not only from a sort of a technical assistance and a familiar perspective, but also from a financial perspective, connecting brands with content creators that can help them promote their brand and help content creators monetize their content. So really good stuff that Rachel Matos and Ana Flores are doing with the We All Grow Latina Network, and definitely check out that podcast that I released a few days ago. And so on the political side, there's been interesting Latino political stuff happening, which is not going to get as much mainstream attention. But if people saw today that longtime California Congressman Xavier Becerra announced he would be stepping down from Congress to become the California Attorney General. So Governor Jerry Brown, yes. I know Pop's thinking Jerry Brown's still around. Yeah, Jerry Brown and is a pretty good governor in his second act here, or his third act or fourth act. There's been a lot of acts in that play in Jerry's political life. But Jerry had to fill the vacancy of Kamala Harris, his current Attorney General, who's stepping away from there to be the newest California senator. And it's a very interesting political move for people that know Xavier Becerra is the highest ranking Latino in the history of the U.S. Congress. He was in the Democratic leadership, and the head of the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives, and he was term limited for that. So people were wondering what was going to be his next move, and it turns out that he's making this move to go to be the Attorney General of California. Very significant. He'll be the second cabinet member or statewide official in California after Secretary of State Maldonado, I believe. It's a little late out here on the East Coast, but he's another rising star as well. And so what's significant about that is, on a career trajectory, for people that don't know Javier's history, his dream in life was always to be the Speaker of the House. That was always what Javier Becerra wanted to do. And he carefully crafted his congressional career by building his forging a path to be in House leadership. So when he became the Democratic Caucus leader, that was a step in that path. Now that the Congress doesn't appear to be Democratic anytime soon, and the fact that there was this opportunity to be the Attorney General, I think it strategically makes a lot of sense. So being a statewide official in a very prominent role, very visible role, where he can really work on some very proactive, progressive policies around addressing criminal disproportionate and unfair criminal sentencing issues, crack down on people that take advantage of people when it comes to mortgages and other unscrupulous financial practices. There's definitely going to be an area of sort of protecting the undocumented and other people that are the most vulnerable in our society, particularly in this political environment. He's already made that commitment. It's a continuation of many of the things, particularly around housing, discrimination, and other issues that Kamala Harris was working on as Attorney General, that he can continue on. And that positions him very well to potentially run for governor in the near future. But I think the more likely scenario is he's eyeing the Senate seat that will eventually be relinquished by Senator Feinstein, which I think is coming up in 2018. So he may be making big moves sooner than we think. And Congressman Becerra will be missed. He was always, the guy is the Latino Boy Scout. If you've never met this guy, don't know much about him, Google him. He has got an incredible personal story, family of immigrants, to a top flight education background. I think he's a Harvard guy, and just very buttoned up, very polished, very classy Latino leader. Javier has supported the work of Latino leaders around the country. I know he helped many friends of ours run for Congress and do other things. There was a little controversy with his support for Kamala Harris in the Senate race. He didn't support a fellow Hispanic member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Loretta Sanchez, who ran for that seat, and he got a little heat for that, particularly other members of the caucus, and particularly Texas Congressman Filimon Vela really handed it to him and was pretty upfront about his dissatisfaction with that decision. But that's politics, and it was pretty clear Kamala was the heavy favorite going into the general election. The other political piece, which is interesting, something to keep an eye on. It's a much of an inside kind of beltway kind of thing, but it is notable. So we have a handful of new, particularly Democratic senators, like Kamala Harris, like Tammy Duckworth in Illinois, like also a nice group of women coming in, which is very positive. Of course, the first Latina and first Mexican-American woman that'll ever be in the U.S. Senate from Nevada will be getting sworn in January, Catherine Cortez Masto. And one of the things that she announced the last few days was her sort of senior staff. So 7 of the most senior people that are going to be in her Senate office and Senate team were announced. And of the 7, only 1 was Latino and none were Latina. And so that's already kind of raised some eyebrows in the Nevada Latino community, in the sort of DC Beltway crowd around wanting to. We continually have struggled with diversity, not just as elected officials in Congress and in the Senate, but also among the staff people. And we've oftentimes had more challenges getting senior level staff. I don't believe there's, for example, one African American chief of staff in the U.S. Senate, even though we have a handful of senators of color, as an example. So, sort of who are in these real powerful positions, sort of in the background, whether it's chief of staff, the people leading policy for a senator. There's only 100 of them. These people, the behind the scenes, are very influential. Hi, Luce. Luce is with us. A very influential appointed official in her own right, and other friends. I think Tricia from Laredo, Texas, is watching as well. Always great to see Tricia, a great leader as well. And she needs to get back on Ray's talk show soon about her environmental justice work out in South Texas. So diversity in government and all levels, whether it's appointed as staff people for electeds or electeds, is really important. And Kamala Harris announced her chief of staff who that's going to be. It's going to be a white male, and so we'll see how the rest of her team shapes up. And again, you're watching Raise Live. Really appreciate y'all checking out a live portion of what becomes our podcast. And you can always check us out at Raise podcast.com or download Ray's Talk Show, Ray's Podcast, anywhere you can download a podcast. You probably have this little purple app that has a little microphone dude in your iPhone, your new iPhone. You can just type in the search bar there, and you can download the show and give us some love and give us a review. That's really helpful, Leo. Yes, they're all Stanford Cardinals, those guys. Very sharp guys, the Castro brothers and Xavier Becerra. Last thing I wanted to say as we wrap this up is much love for everyone that is not only in solidarity with our Native American brothers and sisters at Standing Rock, peacefully protesting the building of the Dakota Access Pipeline, but in particular, two friends of the show, Cindy Rodriguez and Natalie Farfan, who host their own podcast, Latinas from New Jersey, who lead the Morado Lens podcast. So if you're into this diverse flavor and voices, they have a real spicy Latinas, hardcore Latina conversation going on their podcast. So definitely check out Morado Lens podcast. You can Google them and find them anywhere you can find a podcast. But in particular, both those ladies have announced today they're going to North Dakota this weekend to stand in solidarity. Now, we're talking about not only getting to North Dakota and the personal sacrifice it takes just to get to North Dakota. You ain't getting a direct flight out of North Dakota, out of Philly or D.C., let me tell you. It takes a minute to get to North Dakota, much less into the rural hinterland where the Native American lands are out there. But, you're talking about freezing temperatures, people being sprayed with cold water in freezing temperatures. Imagine the health risk. These women are literally putting themselves on the line. So much respect to Cindy, Natalie, and as Vanessa on the chat points out, the veterans, including Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, that are they're going to be standing in solidarity with our Native American brothers and sisters in North Dakota. And whether it's Standing Rock, Benuelas in Puerto Rico, activists are doing everything they can to try to prevent coal ash from being dumped into a landfill in Benuelas on the southern coast of the island. This is a company that's been dumping ash, this similar ash in an area of the Dominican Republic for many years. It's documented that this ash is causing incredible health problems to the children and even birth defects and newborns in the DR. And now they're taking this nonsense to the island of Puerto Rico. So much respect again to our brothers and sisters in solidarity with you in Penuelas and in Standing Rock. It's very interesting because, there's so much. I mean, there's like a national obsession now about the feelings of the the disgruntled working class white person in the Rust Belt and in Middle America, right? And look, we've been saying it here for many years. We're all getting screwed, and we all need to stand up together. So this is not in any way to demean, the fears, the concerns, the pain that people that have been left behind by this economy have experienced. No doubt about it. But it's really interesting because when we talk about this disgruntled group of people, there's a lot of care towards their feelings, towards their financial futures, towards their security, towards their respect, rightfully so. But my question is, and I want us all to think about this, my question is, why isn't that same care, that same empathy, that same sensitivity, that same attention paid to working people who just happen to be of a different color and live in a different part of the United States? I know I'm busting my ass. I know everyone watching this right now, regardless of the color you are, live in the inner city, live in the burbs, what have you, are working really damn hard. And by the way, statistically, even if we work at the same level, we make much less, especially our women. And so, when we talk about why Standing Rock's important, why Black Lives Matter is important, why Benuelas is important, and why we need to keep talking about it because it's clear that the corporate media is not going to pay much attention. So while we have to continue to push for that diversity and that attention on that end of it, we have to use these forums. And that's why I do this. Look, I'm tired. I got to go to work in the morning. I just put my kids to sleep. And, but I know the pain y'all are feeling. I know the fear. Y'all text me. Y'all call me. You send me Facebook messages. You email me. You tweet me. You say, Ralph, what are we going to do? It's real scary. And the one thing I want to make sure that we're clear on is we've got to do this together. And we're all going to roll up our sleeves. Like I said, this is our moment right now. And not only to do it for us, but to do it for even people that have less of a voice, whether they're immigrants or the disabled or, go on and on and on. But that we have to demand and never waver on the respect and the humanity that our community deserves. Because in the same way that that guy that lives in Saginaw, Michigan, who doesn't know what to do now because his factory left 3-4 years ago and he hasn't gotten it together, so that we have to absolutely do what we can to support that person. We have to demand equal respect, equal acknowledgement of the contribution, because the underlying message of the discussion of the quote unquote working class white person is that on some level that implies almost explicitly that Black and Latino citizens aren't working as hard and not as contributing financially or culturally to this country, and that's nonsense. And we have to combat the stereotype that blacks are lazy and inner city people are like gaming the system and welfare queens, because that sentiment is still a big part, whether people want to admit it or not, part of this dynamic that we're experiencing and part of the Trump phenomenon. He played on those fears, he played on those stereotypes, and you're not going to tell me that this fascination now by the mainstream media about this disgruntled segment of our population, when there's someone who just, Munasher, one of the gentlemen that just came on the chat, said, we've been dealing with similar hardships for decades, is being ignored. And our brothers and sisters are in Standing Rock and Benuelas and all over the country dealing with this stuff. And I really appreciate you watching Raise Live on a Thursday night. Y'all going to be doing a lot of things. Hopefully a few of y'all are going to go have a good time on a Thursday night. I'm going to go Betty Bye and go to work in the morning. But that's a good time. We enjoy what we do here. And y'all are watching, like I said, not because I'm cute, but because y'all are feeling the same way. And we just got to find more mechanisms. I do Facebook Live, not because I just want to talk all the time, even though I like to talk, but because that's where y'all are at. So to the extent we can use other platforms where we can have more of a dialogue, whether it's Google Hangouts or Fire Talk, we will do that. And I look forward to engaging more of y'all in these conversations. And it's not just reading y'all in chats, because I want to hear y'all voices too. And all of you that are on here are always welcome to be on Race Talk Show as well. I'm going to wrap it up, but again, really appreciate Maisel. Let me see what Maisel had to say here. Bottom line, the Dems need to win, and there's been an argument that identity politics have made the Dems a coastal party. Well, I would say this, that there's no one more, there was no one more identified with identity politics than Barack Obama, and he won these voters. I think it's another conversation, Maisel. I think the bottom line is, the Clinton campaign, definitely not just didn't take care of the entire coalition, but just took a lot of things for granted. But it's another conversation. I can go on and on that, but the more intel and landscaping I'm doing with my friends around the country, particularly in swing states, is that what I suspected around the thinking they had it, and that sentiment, whether they want to admit it or not, was even worse than I perceived as I was going day to day. And I'm continuing to have those conversations, and I'll share tidbits as we get into it. But the bottom line is, all you do is win the Obama states, or at least almost all the Obama states. And, they fell very short, unfortunately, even though she had many more voters around the country. But we knew the rules going into this, unfortunately. But we are going to have to address the electoral college system because it's not particularly democratic. Um, Maisel having some things to say about Robbie Mook. Yeah, well, he didn't pull it off. It's a little too Brooklyn focused, that campaign, but it happens. We'll have to move on, and we'll see how things go. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate y'all. Look out for the podcast about Hablando de lo Cubano, talking to Cuban leaders about the aftermath of Fidel's death. That's going to be interesting. And got a lot coming on the feed, a lot of great interviews that are in the archives that we still haven't released. And I look forward for y'all to be a part of that. My main man, Rafael Maldonado Jr., Big Ralphie, a man that serves us very well every day, honorably in the Philadelphia Police Force. He always joins when I'm about to wrap up. I'm sorry, Ralph. It's not that I'm avoiding you. You always jump on at the last minute. So much respect to your service, brother, and always appreciate you. Get to work, y'all. Get your rest. I guess the last thing I'll say is we have to figure out how to support each other physiologically because a lot of us are going through it. We're stressing. We're not resting. We're really scared about the future, and we're really sort of wondering, we've all done so much, and these generations, we've all done so much to get to this point. And the Obama president, talk about symbolism, God bless you, Luz. Symbolism, right? I mean, it represented, his presidency amongst anything represented so much validation for so many of us, that our families were a part of this country, that we could truly be comfortable in our own skin as Americans, and our kids could live in a world that didn't have all that, as much of that crap that we all grew up with, animosity and division and segregation and feeling, having to justify your identity and all these hangups and complejos that all created for all of us. And we got to this milestone in this stage in our lives where we felt that we finally could take a breath, right? And every time Michelle and Brock and their wonderful family and all the good things that came out of that, appreciate you, Ralph, that came out of that, these 8 years, right? Psychologically for us, all got tiraron la basura in one day a few weeks ago. And we're still all recovering from that. I hear from you guys. And I'm feeling it. And, I know you all are. So I think as we get closer to the holidays on the podcast and on here, we need to have more conversations about how we support each other and just give us the space to take a breath and understand that there's nothing that an election can do to minimize or chip away at all at our humanity. And we're going to have to support each other to understand that and, kind of move forward with esa balancia, no? So thank you, Luis. Appreciate it. Felix Montalada, my main man. I'll definitely give you a call tomorrow, Felix. Hopefully around lunches, like 1 o'clock, I'll be available. Hopefully we can connect. And Jenny Duran, my homegirl, all my great friends and family that are on here. You can always share these shows too because I love y'all, but I only have so many friends. So to really get this out there the way we need to extend, let more people know about these conversations. And I like this Thursday night thing around 10. It kind of works people's personal schedules. So I think we're going to kind of keep working on it. You're my sister, Jenny. You know that. There's no doubt about it. And I really appreciate all you guys on here. Thank you so much. Get some rest. Take care of each other. Enjoy your weekends. But stay vigilant. We're going to need to do that. You can call me anytime, my friend. We'll talk soon. Peace.